Hey folks, welcome back to the Q Shed. Today I want to do something a little different. I wanted to talk about my barbecue journey, I guess you'd call it. How I arrived at the point I'm at, where I've actually started a YouTube channel to try to, as Harry Sue might say, spread barbecue love. To me, barbecue is all about family and friends and enjoyment. And it's all about backyard barbecue as well. I've never competed in anything, in any kind of barbecue contest anyway. And I've never owned a restaurant or worked in a restaurant for that matter that serves barbecue. I do it because I love it and because I like to see people smile. And good barbecue tends to have that effect on people. In fact, bad barbecue can even have that effect on people. So I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about how things began before I built the Q Shed and before I got my wonderful Cascade Smokers custom cooker. And that goes back about 12 years to when I first started putting smoke on meat. And let me back up a little also and talk about the difference between barbecue and grilling. Barbecue typically means indirect cooking. Grilling is cooking directly over a fire, what you'd do with a steak or hamburgers or hot dogs. Either done on a gas grill or a charcoal grill like a Weber kettle, which is a wonderful little cooker. But in terms of smoking meat, what I refer to as barbecue, I started out about 12 years ago with a Big Chief electric smoker. You've probably seen these, but they are flimsy aluminum. They've got a little electric hot plate in the bottom, and you add small wood chips to it to get the smoke flavor. So all I ever really did with that initially was fish and jerky. Eventually I started doing some ribs in there just to put smoke on them, and then I would try to finish them off on the grill indirectly until they got close to the degree of doneness I wanted, and then put them directly over the flame toward the end to sort of burn the sauce on without actually burning it, although sometimes that happens. So it wasn't ideal by any means, obviously. And the problem with those kinds of cookers is that primarily, well, there are a couple of problems. First of all, lack of capacity. Secondly, they don't get very hot. It's almost cold smoking is all you're able to do. So you can add a little smoke flavor, but really not much else. So a couple of years later, I ended up moving up in the world to some degree and picked up a propane cooker from Camp Chef called the Smoke Vault, and I had that for 10 years and did frankly a lot of good barbecue on it. I know people turn up their nose at propane cookers, and perhaps rightly so, because there are some real downsides that we'll talk about in a minute. But like any other cooker, once you learn it and learn its positives and negatives, you can work with those and turn out some good barbecue. So the negatives with the smoke vault are capacity for one. You can squeeze quite a bit of meat in there, but it's not ideal. The other thing is it's a bit flimsy. It's made out of very thin metal and doesn't hold temps very well. And probably the biggest challenge with it is that even with the water pan full, it tends to dry out the meat. I don't know if that's a factor of using propane as a heat source or what, but it was something you constantly had to fight against by spritzing typically. So I did a lot of spritzing with that cooker. But I had it for 10 years, and like I said, I made some darn good barbecue, if I do say so myself, on it. Again, it's a matter of learning from mistakes and learning whatever cooker you're using. Finally, last year, in 2020, I decided to upgrade in a big way. I had become serious enough about barbecuing, done it enough, had enough encouragement from friends and family to move on and move up to a bigger and better cooker. Basically a lifetime cooker for me, something that I could have forever and enjoy with plenty of capacity. So once I made that decision, the next thing I had to decide was the type of fuel that cooker would use. And essentially, you can have electric, you can have propane, as I've mentioned, you can have pellets, you can have full splits, in other words, logs, or you can have charcoal as a heat source combined with wood chunks, which is obviously what I've decided to go with. But let me talk a little about how I arrived at that decision, because I think this could be important for someone just getting started in backyard barbecue. So initially, I wanted something that had good capacity, that was relatively simple, that if I wanted to, I could sort of set it and forget it, ideally, to allow myself to have some sleep on long cooks for things like brisket and pulled pork. So I started looking at high-end pellet grills from Pits and Spits. Now, there are other brands as well that are really good pellet cookers, of course, but Pits and Spits, they're made in Houston, they're stainless steel, they've got good capacity, they use top quality components, and so I was zeroed in on those for quite a while. And this is about a 2-year period that I started looking and did a lot of research and a lot of thinking before committing to that lifetime cooker. The problem with pellet grills for me, now I've had a lot of good barbecue from pellet grills, and I'm not putting them down. For me, they lack a bit of control, because if you get the heat up too high, with most of them, anything over 250 to 275, you get less and less smoke. The Pits and Spits tends to allow you to go up to about 300 from what I understood and the reviews I watched, which is better. But sometimes when I'm doing chicken, I'd like to get it up to about 350 to try to get the skin crispy, for instance, and still have a reasonable amount of smoke. So you do lose some flexibility with a pellet cooker. The other thing with pellet cookers, in terms of negatives, is that they are complicated. You have various components. First of all, they're based on electricity, so if you have a problem with that in terms of having electricity go out and you have a big cook planned, it's not going to happen, obviously. But secondly, the components can fail. Any one of them can fail and put you out of business. You've got the igniter, you've got the burn pot, you've got the controller, you've got the auger motor. Any of those things can have issues, and you're not cooking. So I eventually decided against a pellet cooker and went the other direction completely in terms of my focus, which is offset cookers. Offset cookers can be bought for as little as I think $99 or $149 at Home Depot and such. You pretty much want to stay away from those though, because they're made of very flimsy metal. They don't hold temps, and that's key with an offset cooker. So I started focusing on the high end, the quality offset cookers like Lone Star grills, for instance. But I thought a lot about offset cookers and was really close to pulling the trigger on one of those. First, I want to talk about the positives of offset cookers, the reasons I almost bought one. It is the quintessential way to barbecue as far as I'm concerned. I think you get the best flavor profile from offset cooking. You have a live fire in the firebox. Your heat source and smoke source are one and the same, and that is splits of wood, 18 or so inches long in a bigger cooker like I was looking at. So you're building a fire in there, and there's a heavy draw through the cook chamber. From that fire, you get heat and smoke sort of ripping across the meat. Tends to give the best flavor profile from everything I have experienced and from everything I've gathered through my research. There are some negatives to offset cookers though. First of all, you have to be able to source the right kind of wood. Now, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and we have no lack of wood, but it's mostly the wrong kind of wood. What we have is softwood as opposed to hardwoods. A lot of fir and pine. Obviously, you can't smoke with that. If I was in Central Texas and had an unlimited access to post oak or whatnot, then it would be a different story. But out here we really don't. We do have access to some oak and apple wood and things like that, and those are good smoker woods, but they're not as available or easily accessible as they are in other places. The other thing is you've got to have the ability and the room to store all of that wood while it seasons, unless you buy it already seasoned. That can take a year or so for wood to become properly seasoned, and you got to have a place to keep it that's dry in the meantime. I really did not and do not have that. And then finally, the other downside with an offset cooker, if you can call it that, is that about every 45 minutes to an hour you have to add a new split of wood to keep the temperature where you want it. That's not necessarily a downside. I enjoy tinkering with the fire. I think a lot of folks do. But if you want to cook something that's going to take 14, 15 hours, like brisket, like pulled pork, you're going to be getting up every hour or so during the night and doing that, which for me is not ideal, to be honest. So while part of me would desperately love to have a quality offset cooker, I ultimately decided that it wasn't the right cooker for me at this point because of the sort of all-around cooker I was looking for. So ultimately I settled on charcoal for a heat source and wood chunks for a smoke flavor. Once I went down that road, there are quite a few choices available. There is the Weber Smoky Mountain that is probably the most common, the most widely used among charcoal cookers. They're also, to a degree, set it and forget it type cookers, or at least they can be. You can adapt a blower fan with something like the Fireboard 2 drive that I use to help regulate the temperatures on long cooks. You can buy bigger charcoal baskets to get you through the longest cook, which I've done as well. But in terms of an overall, all-around, lifetime cooker, I wanted something more. So I started looking at insulated cabinet-type charcoal cookers. Again, I went back to Lone Star Grills. They make a terrific insulated vertical cabinet smoker. And I, again, was very close to pulling the trigger on one of those. But on the Barbecue Brethren forum, I ran across Cascade Smokers, which is local to me, or at least about a 2.5-hour drive. They're based in Central Oregon and produce super high quality insulated cabinet charcoal cookers. So that's what I ended up going with. I'm going to do another video that will go into my cooker in great detail, so I'm not going to talk too much about that today. But the last thing I wanted to mention is, now that we've talked about sort of how I ended up where I am and with the cookers I've owned, I wanted to talk about what I would do differently if I was just beginning my backyard barbecue journey. And the advice I would give to anyone starting out today is to not go with an electric or propane smoker. I would start out with a 22.5-inch Weber Smoky Mountain. They again are extremely flexible. They are well built. You have Weber's 10-year warranty, which is fantastic. Their service is outstanding, and they're easy to use. They have decent capacity. You can also hang things like ribs and chicken on them, which is a lot of fun, creates great flavor. I have another video on that as well. But again, with the negatives I listed about propane, its tendency to dry out the meat. Some people feel it puts an off flavor on meat. I never noticed that much, but I just think that for roughly the same price as any decent propane cooker, I would very much prefer and would recommend to people starting out to go with a Weber Smoky Mountain. They do make an 18-inch version and even a 14-inch version. Those to me are just too small for what I want to do. With the 22-inch, you can get a couple of slabs of ribs on each of the 2 racks, so a total of 4 racks of ribs. And you can lay them flat, full length, or as I mentioned, you can hang them. But that's what I would start out with, and that would be my recommendation. So let me know in the comments below if you have other ideas. I don't mean to offend anyone who's made other choices. That's not what this is about. To me, barbecue is about enjoyment, pure and simple. It's about putting smiles on people's faces. It's about friends. It's about family. It's about everything that makes life worth living. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me in the Q Shed today. Take care.